appreciating what was in the budget itself for purposes of reading it by the Minister of Finance, but also for us to interact with it as citizens of this country. Not much can change. So the floodlights, the attention and all the strength should now be put on how do we, or how does government use the resources that have been allocated. And that's where the biggest challenge in the budget making process and budget reading and budget passing actually is. Because there we tend to see utilization that has completely no connection with the budget. We tend to see utilization that is diverse. We tend to see utilization that is beyond what was actually allocated. And those are some of the concerns that we have now. And for us, as policy analysts, ours is to encourage citizens, Ugandans, but also actors in the Ugandan economy to really be involved in the utilization of the resources that have been allocated. That's where we'll see change, because you cannot change what was already allocated. So indeed, yes, there were 52 trillion that have been allocated. The highlights for me were two. The first is the frugality. Over time, we've been asking government to really be frugal at its expenditure. And indeed, in this budget, the Minister of Finance was very clear when he mentioned that they will not be buying cars for public servants, except ambulances. Then he also mentioned that they've limited travel for public servants. And also he mentioned that they're also going to be really very keen on resources that they spend through workshops. And for those who understand the whole working through workshops and what it means, there's a lot of expenditure that goes through workshops. So they're looking into what they spend through workshops. We don't know what exactly that would mean, but we'll be keen to know what measures they are putting in place to limit expenditure through workshops. Maybe they are limiting there's so many workshops they are organizing, maybe they are limiting certain expenditures. We are yet to see, but at least those are the key elements for me on the bit of frugality that I take note of, and I appreciate the government of Uganda. But also to mention that the same elements of frugality also appeared in the last financial year budget. And we've had issues around the government of Uganda implementing those frugality aspects, or those measures on frugality, or those measures on limiting expenditure, public expenditure. And to some extent, they still have some issues that they have to deal with.
Amidst the pledging and the promises.
Absolutely,
of away.
But the most important bit is their aspiration for them to really to limit the expenditure.
I think to them,
and where they should limit the expenditure. Those are very key that we should actually
note. They should increase more steps.
More steps. So we encourage them to increase more steps, and also to be committed to what they have actually promised, that they're going to reduce that expenditure.
And with all the priorities that were considered, as far as the budget is concerned, do you really think they align with the government's goals?
To some extent, yes. But the only big question that we have at the end of the day, which is a utilization question, is whether we at the receiving end will be able to see our government from that angle. And that is really the big question and the big challenge that budget implementers now face at the end of the day. But the priorities, yes, are there, but to what extent will we be able to see them?
So it's like kind of, it's a two-way. It's a two-way process. Not only
indeed.
A government initiative or government to solve or find wherever that money or the funds have to come from.
Yes.
It's a two-way.
It's a two-way.
We are part of that struggle, part of the process of getting that money come through.
But they've indicated that it's been allocated, and indeed it's been allocated, but there are quite a number of challenges between allocation and utilization that I will highlight, especially the ones that we are seeing today, that I'll probably later highlight after looking at what are the other highlights. Then the second highlight for me was the recognition that we actually have a challenge with managing our debt as a country. And indeed, the recognition that the biggest allocation of resources this financial year, will be to finance our debts. That is really, really a key highlight, meaning that over 60% of our resources that we'll be able to generate as a country will go to debt financing. The government is actually telling you that we may not actually be able to meet our obligations on providing services to the citizens. That is very key, and I think citizens need to note that. Then the other one is the allocation of funds that are meant to be utilized by ordinary citizens who are into different businesses, agro-processing, manufacturing, you know, that allocation. And this is really funds allocated to the different government programs to boost business, but also to make Ugandans prosper in a certain way. So we've seen allocation to programs like Emyoga, programs like PDM, Parish Development Model, Youth Livelihood Program, Women's Economic Fund, and others. They are still going on. And for me, that is where the ordinary Ugandan should actually be reaching and receiving monies that have been allocated in this budget. That was also another highlight. So with those highlights,
we should be optimistic.
So we should be optimistic.
There will be economic growth, job creation.
To an extent, if those resources that have been allocated actually are utilized in a way that they have been planned to be utilized. And if actually those groups that have been mobilized, trained, and are ready to receive these funds, actually receive those funds and invest the funds in the different businesses they are engaging in, then maybe we'll be able to see some bit of growth at different levels. It may not be at the top line public level, maybe central government level, but maybe at their household level we'll be able to see some elements of growth when they use these resources. So for me that was also a highlight. Then the bit of domestic carriers. That is also a really, really key highlight. And why? Because all of you are able, or maybe not all of you, but most of you are able to say that the economy is currently biting. It's actually a catchphrase now that the economy is really biting. And that means that a lot of actors in that economy cannot thrive. Key are the private sector in this economy. And why am I singling out the private sector? The private sector are the ones that engage in business with the government of Uganda. And the private sector are some of those that have their income locked in domestic carriers. So if government is not able to pay those that it owes money, and it increases its domestic carriers and fails to pay, then the private sector cannot thrive. The businesses cannot thrive that are doing business with the government of Uganda. So you find a challenge that you have an economy that is intended to be developed on the basis of the private sector growth, but then private sector is actually not growing. And private sector is not growing because maybe the biggest players in the private sector that will drive the growth have their resources tied in domestic carriers. Government is not paying them. That is, I think, for me, a challenge. A challenge. So it means, it's increasing. So
it means there was nothing like them being favored, or at least more measures have to be put in place.
More measures have to be put in place to make sure that the areas are reduced. The domestic areas are reduced. Because when they are reduced, it means that they've paid actually the private sector that are doing business with the government. And when they pay them, of course they will inject the money into the economy, and we'll see the economy thriving. So if domestic areas continue increasing, it means they are not paying, or if they are paying, they are not paying at the rate at which they are seeking services.
Maybe just letting the viewer get to know how that will also really be biting, as how it would really be biting in terms of there will not be more innovations coming through, the infrastructure itself will be affected, the energy connectivity, just for the viewer to get to understand.
So for the viewer, you need to know that when the private sector that is intended to drive the economy, or to come up with businesses, innovate different business ideas that run the economy, if they do not have resources, if their resources are locked up in money that is owed by the government of Uganda, and the government is not paying that money, then the private sector cannot innovate. Then the private sector cannot perform in its business to its fullest. Then the economy cannot thrive because there is nothing they are bringing to the economy. If it's a manufacturing company, for instance, that has money that is locked in government, it can't manufacture because it doesn't have the money to use. If it's an agro-processing plant or farm or entity, it cannot engage in agro-processing. It means that if it was maybe agro-processing and producing maybe, let me say, oil, and maybe procuring maybe palm nuts from farmers. It cannot buy those palm nuts from the farmers because it's not processing. It doesn't have the money to inject into that whole process of processing or even buying from the farmers. So the farmers will not have anyone to sell to.
The entire chain will totally be broken down.
Yes, the value chain will be broken down because the source of the revenue is not
really
actually
affected.
coming. So that is the biggest highlight for me from an angle of the private sector and the angle of business growth and development, because the whole anticipation is that the private sector should be able to facilitate the business growth and investment. And if today we are crying that the economy is biting, then it means that if we want it not to bite in this financial year, then let's meet those domestic areas. Let's pay all those people that have areas that are held up with the government of Uganda, and maybe limit on taking on more areas, or put in place measures to pay on time. Because when the payment is not on time,
I would
then
agree
it
with
really,
that, at least paying on time.
Pay on time, then it really drags the whole value chain and
process.
affects it. So that's where the challenge is. So for me, those were the highlights of the budget that was read last week. And indeed, we've had all these conversations, and people have actually been keen on the debt because it has been growing over time. We've seen it coming and coming and coming up to where we are. Well, to the policy analysts, we say it's a worrying. To economists, they say maybe it's not worrying. But I think we also need to put in place measures that limits our borrowing. What can we do that would limit our borrowing? We can't have the borrowing as the only measure.
It shouldn't really be a solution at the end of the day that we always...
The only solution.
The only solution that comes around when we're to make a decision on how to get the funds.
Maybe it can be there, but let it be really limited.
And maybe putting the funds to good use as well at the end of the day.
That's the other challenge.
Because it hurts to pay for a debt that has not really worked out for you.
Now, when it comes to putting funds to the good use, I think that's in the last financial year, we saw where there was delayed disbursement of resources to different government programs, to the tune of about 46% programs were able to receive public resources in time and to be implemented. But what that meant was that delay alone will affect project delivery on time. Different projects will not be delivered on time, and when they're not delivered on time, some of them are actually loans and debts. So it would mean that we are paying for something, but we have not been able to receive the service yet. So it still comes back. Something is really holding us back a little bit, even when there are measures that are being put in place. So that is one of the challenges that we need to pay attention to as we utilize the resources that have been allocated in this financial year. Okay.
Away from the economy also biting, like everyone puts it, it is a song or something we have to always talk about in our conversations. We can't avoid, and also takes us to the debt itself, something that we always have to talk about in our conversations, and the other challenges as well, not forgetting the impacts of the climate change itself. Do you think this budget has provisions to address such challenges or the environmental sustainability?
The entire National Development Plan has some programs that are intended to really meet some of the aspirations around addressing effects of climate change. But the core should actually be the resources allocated through the Ministry of Agriculture. And that's where we should be able to see the aspirations around addressing climate change. But you know, addressing climate change as an aspect is one of the so many other things that the government has to allocate resources to within the Ministry of Agriculture. And already, Ministry of Agriculture with the other different ministries in that program are still being challenged at resource allocation itself. So we don't really see sufficient resources allocated to addressing climate change in this particular budget, but there are efforts that the government are taking.
At least, how about the other resources to do with healthcare?
Same. Already, what the minister promised is that because that was the issue at the day, there was an issue of medical interns who were on strike and they wanted their payment. And the minister made a comment that indeed we are going to pay them. That was one of the few comments that he made, that we are going to pay them. However, when you go back to look at the actual budget that was passed and read, and you try to find where are the resources that are going to be used in the payment of these medical interns, you don't see something tangible. So for the whole entire program on health, which is under Human Capital Development, there are still challenges around allocating the sufficient resources. There are challenges around allocating sufficient resources to National Drug Authority, for instance, to have the right quantity of medicines in the different health centers and hospitals. There's a challenge around the quality of the service itself. There's the challenge around accessing the service itself. So those challenges are still there, and they're perennial, and they're not going away, because to an ordinary person, if you ask them today, if they go to a health center, do they receive a service?
That scares once you say it is not something that is going to stop now.
No, it hasn't stopped yet, and we see measures, but we're yet to see those measures really curbing it, stopping it, so that for an ordinary person, when they access a medical facility, they receive a service immediately and there and then. We are yet to get to that level, but it really speaks to the allocation of resources in that particular sector. We are yet to get the rightful allocation.
Well, when I remember the conversation we had last week, we talked about the gap itself between the poor and the rich. The curve really goes high and high. So I just don't know if this, what do you think, your thoughts when it comes to the budget itself? Is it going to, is there a point where it caters for the income inequality or the supporting the marginalized communities?
Well, that's been a big question for some time now. There is no direct aspect that allows the budget to reduce income for those that have, so that it creates some bit of equality between those that have and those that don't have, except where we see taxes and new taxes being introduced for certain categories of income earners. And the whole idea is that if the taxes are progressive, then indeed some resources will be reduced and then will be balanced, and then it creates some bit of equality. But still, that is yet to be realized, because the equality would be seen from aspects like education, aspects like healthy service delivery, and as you already know, those are already privatized. You know, there are private services that are being provided. So we have public and then private, but the bigger preference is more for private, while a larger part of the population is actually accessing public services. But when you look at the resources that are allocated to the public services, health, education, they are really meager resources that are allocated there. So you still will find the gap, the inequality between the rich and the poor, or those who have and those who don't have, widening at different levels, from household, but also to when we access public services, to also when we access the schools we go to, the kind of education we receive. So all of that really comes into bite and speaks to the whole inequality itself. But also it speaks to the kind of governance that we have. You know, when you look at the resource allocation in the different local governments, some local governments are sufficiently resourced. Some are really struggling to find resources to be able to even provide the least services that they provide to their communities. So it's still a big challenge, and you do not see deliberate measures to be able to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, except when it comes to the progressiveness in the tax measures that are taken, but also the tax regimes that have been introduced for this financial year.
Wow. Let's be optimistic at the end of the day. Once you think about it so keenly, you're like, okay, there's trouble somewhere there. Maybe you as an analyst, I'm sure you've been following up at different readings or presentations. And at least recently, when this was passed itself, the conversations that are going on, people having complaints, and they're really turning their guns or turning their fingers and pointing at URA itself. Because it is a budget, I agree. It is a budget. One is like, why would I fund for it? Why is government looking at me? You know, I know, I understand people have to pay their taxes, but those are the conversations that are going on in the public, in the communities, and they're complaining about it. Why are they turning their fingers pointing at URA?
You know, for URA in particular, revenue generation has actually increased their revenue, the revenue they generate has increased, I think, to the tune of about 46, 47%. But URA has consistently not met its revenue mobilization targets. Well, to date, in this financial year, it was about 11 trillion 700. That was the target, 700 and something billion, and I think they were able to raise 11 trillion 400 and something billion. And largely, I would say they've really made efforts. And indeed, when you look at the different measures they've put in place, you see that they're actually making efforts in raising and mobilizing revenue that should finance the budget. And for me, I would give them really a thumbs up on that. Now, the question is raising or mobilizing revenue from an economy that is largely informal, that is largely subsistence. It speaks to the kind of revenue you'll be able to generate. So it's really that kind of low-level revenue that you should expect to generate. The biggest taxpayers, there are 100 biggest taxpayers. If you look at, let me say, the private sector, and they give you 100 business taxpayers, the revenue they generate, it's to run an economy of 52 trillion, no, they can't. They haven't been able to, you see? So it means that as a government, we need to put in place measures that boost the economy to the level where we have businesses or corporations that can raise revenue to the top. You see? And beyond looking at an ordinary citizen who pays their tax, because this is a private sector-led economy, and indeed it should be the private sector to even facilitate revenue mobilization to a large extent. But if we miss certain resources and we haven't closed some gaps where we lose resources, especially when it comes to taxing corporations, and we find that we cannot tax them enough, or we find there is a tax avoidance, or we find that they are evading the payment of tax itself, or we find that there is actually corruption and collusion to really defraud the public or the government, it becomes a challenge. But I know that Uganda Revenue Authority has invested a lot in ICT development, and ICT development in a way has really increased their revenue mobilization for various things, from corporations in the first place, but also from public services that are provided by different government entities. So I know that there is that effort also, but still we are not yet at the level where we want to be. The targets, we have not met them. So when we fail to meet the targets, then automatically the government has to go into borrowing to be able to meet. Now, that's the other conversation we had of why then do we have to take on programs that require us to have more money, more than what we generate. Why don't we measure ourselves with the little that we are able to generate? Because this particular financial budget will be financed to the tune of about 26 trillion from public revenue, which is from the revenue collected by the Uganda Revenue Authority. And it's already a 52 trillion budget. So when you look at it, it's like a 40–50% kind of engagement. So the conversation should be that why don't we tag everything to this, to the revenue that we've been able to generate, and then be able to address the issues of public service delivery. So that's for me the bigger question. Then the other is our, okay, there are efforts, but also our, should I say, belief in the efforts to really close the gaps of where we are losing all this money. We are losing a lot of money through misappropriation, misallocation, corruption, failure to even collect revenue from certain corporations. There are quite a number of issues. Evasion,
could it be
tax
laxity?
Evasion. No, it's not laxity, but it's the whole administration, the tax administration itself. Yes, it's the tax administration. It has loopholes, and these loopholes allow certain companies to go away without paying the rightful revenue. Of course, ICT is coming in, and it will really play a very big part, but it's still a long way to go. Most of the ICT programs that have been launched are still in pilot phase, and even when they're in pilot phase, not all business entities are actually going through them. So the biggest example
that will move with the trends and the technologies, because at the end of the day,
maybe allow us to close the gaps.
Okay, this is Sophie. Sophie is the one who is heading that entity, and she's trying to tax me this hard. So it's better to have the ICT come in.
the ICT come in, but come in at full blast. When everyone, we need regulations that make sure that allow everyone to, for instance, work through that ICT facility that has been created. But it will take us some bit of time, maybe 4 to 5 or 6 years, when we bring in everyone on board, all public entities on board. You already know that through the public procurement system, we have the electronic government procurement portal, and we are, at the moment, we have, I think, about 45 public entities that have signed up to this electronic government procurement system. And the whole idea was that beyond really improving and the efficiency in public procurement, it will help us on curbing some of these, closing some of these gaps around corruption. But until we have a regulation or a guideline that makes it mandatory for all public procurements to go through the electronic government procurement system. Some are off the system, some are on the system because it's still a pilot, and when it's off the system, a lot can happen, you see. So we still have those collusions that are happening, and it will take us some time to deal with them, but the measure taken, which is ICT, maybe is the right measure. Let's fast track it, let's maybe make it faster, and let's have the right regulations, and then we'll be able to see that now Uganda Revenue Authority raises more money. Uganda Revenue Authority itself is telling you that before it was collecting revenue for public entities, where public entities were collecting their revenue themselves, there was a lot of resources that could not come to the public, to the government of Uganda, coffers, and the treasury. Really be tracked down. They couldn't, because they were collected at public entities, and then the resources would stay. But when Uganda Revenue Authority started collecting this revenue, they were shocked that all this money is actually
lying around somewhere.
Yes, and it tripled and tripled in just a short period of maybe 1 year. The money they could collect was like, oh my God, we have this money. So if we are having the right regulations and we mandate every paying system, paying resources to the government of Uganda to go maybe through an organized measure like a Uganda Revenue Authority or any other that may be recommended, then maybe we'll be able to increase the revenue
as
that
we track
the government
down
generated.
the whole process of the ICT itself, that everyone can come on board.
Absolutely, that everyone can come on board. But especially the businesses that are in the business environment, those are the ones that we should first target, because those are the ones that are running the economy. You know, an ordinary Ugandan who is receiving a 1 million Uganda shillings from Yoga, okay, yes, is an actor in the economy, but at the lowest level. Let's first look at those actors that are at the highest level maybe, and then we look at those. So for me, that will be very key as we go into the utilization. I'll pay attention to the utilization of the resources that have been allocated. Then the other is an active citizenry. An active citizenry is a citizenry that really asks. Today, many of us do not know whether actually maybe not me, but many Ugandans do not know that they are the beneficiaries of the Myoga program, or they are the beneficiaries of the PDM. I'm sure you remember, like about a month ago, there was this story about the same people that are receiving every program that are benefiting from every program that comes. They benefited from Bonaba Gawale, they benefited from NADS, they benefited from Yoga, youth livelihood when they are 50 years, women economic empowerment when they are men, and now with the PDM, they are also at the forefront. They are the same players.
At the parish level.
I'm telling you, that is actually possible. But why? It's possible because many of us who are beneficiaries are very reluctant. Okay, maybe we may not be reluctant, but we've given up on the government. We've given up on these opportunities that the government is creating. They are not for us. They are for those people. I want to encourage our viewers.
And others don't even put it to good use. They're like,
before you even come to good use, because that good use is a bit political, I would like to encourage our viewers today that this money that has been allocated to PDM, for instance, if you are at the level where you should be receiving it, please follow up. Monitor, go to your local leaders, ask whether this money has come. Be keen, because announcements are always made on radio and television when this money is released. Be keen to know who in my community has actually received this money. And if I am meant to receive it, why am I not receiving it? Why am I outside the brackets? You see, if we don't monitor, indeed, others, the same groups or the same people will receive this money and will utilize it, and for them, they will probably prosper erroneously, and for you, you won't. Why? Because you've just had a laid-back approach to the government programs and probably government services, and then it affects you at the end of the day. It is you who is left behind. You remember that we are still aspiring for the Leave No One Behind sustainability program of a global agenda. And everyone should actually be an actor in the economy. Everyone should participate in this economy, and I encourage you to participate. Now, when it comes to how you put this money to good use, in this budget, there was an allocation of about 30 billion Uganda shillings, and this allocation is for mindset change. Ordinarily, we believe that mindset change is one of the key priorities that the government of Uganda should allocate more resources to. Because mindset change is the reason why people are laid back. Mindset change is the reason why citizens have left everything to the government and they're like, okay, they should do what they want. Let them do what they want. But at the end of the day, we are missing the actors, we are missing innovation, we are missing the creativity that should be running this government. And the opportunities that are coming through, we would not realize our gains out of them. So we keep asking, but we've had all these government programs from Bonaba Gagawale, Prosperity for all of these, but we don't seem to see communities that are prospering, communities that are moving from stage 1 to stage 2, stage 3. Why? Because of that mindset change. The few that are getting, maybe the question is utilization. And even if it's the non-utilization, even if they utilize those resources very well, the actors in their environment who are supposed to be in their economy, who are in their market, do not have resources to buy from them. So if, for instance, you find an agro-processor, they are probably processing coffee, let me say, maybe they grow, they process it, and they maybe provide it and provide value to it, and then put it on the market. But the ordinary Ugandan who should be buying it does not have disposable income to buy coffee, and doesn't even know that.
Can't even walk to the store.
No, coffee is not their priority. They can't spend on coffee, you see. So you are an agro-processor who has put your coffee in the market, it can't be bought.
And invested so much.
Absolutely.
Even in the value
so it's a mindset change. If we all act in our economy, we'll all have disposable income. Probably that's the whole idea around
so it's
these
more
programs.
of the disposable income, not even just the issue of like, it's a boo-boo product.
No. Before you come to boo-boo, let me first have disposable income, because maybe the income I have, I'm reserving it for one, paying tuition for my child who is at university.
Before they kick me out of the house, at the end of the day, I need to pay the rent fees.
Then there's rent. You know, there are those that are still struggling with rent. Then there are those that are still struggling with what to eat on a daily basis. So their income is only to provide what to eat.
So they just go for this, what is available, what they can afford.
Yes, but also mindset change is needed, because you find those that have large chunks of land and they have not thought about what to use that land for. I know that there was a program, there was an intention of coming up with a tax to tax that land, to be able to move them into using it. But I think the whole idea of mindset change is that the more we help these people realize the value of the land they have, and also give them some bit of knowledge and skills on how to use that land, the more they become actors in the economy, the more land becomes a factor of production. But when we leave them on their own with their land, the best they can do is to sell it. And even those who buy it, the best they can do is to construct houses on it. So land, yes, is a factor of production, but the rate at which it's producing for the economy is fluid. Yes, it's fluid. So those are all the challenges that we have with this economy.
Well, taking you back to the whole conversation or presentation of the budget itself, now that we're trying to find a solution, or maybe get to know it's also our responsibility as the citizens to pay or maybe fund for the budget to take its course. Do you think, did it promote in any way the foreign direct investment? Because we need to improve our businesses, the economy itself, to stop biting at the moment.
Yes, there's still an aspiration for foreign direct investment, but at the same time there's also an aspiration for growing local investment, and that's why you see they've invested resources in programs like the parish development model, so that they nurture business growth from that level. Initially, business growth would start at a certain level, you know, but now government's investment and injection into that arrangement is to support and budding business ideas, creative ideas, to support already existing businesses or small scale businesses or SMEs to really grow. And that, in my view, is one of the ways that they're going to really support the increase in the revenue generation. Because when the businesses grow, when the businesses are able to prosper, then they'll be able to meet their tax revenue. But also, you should appreciate that most of the businesses now have actually registered taxpayers, and they have really functional tax identification numbers, most businesses. And also, they've really lessened the requirements on establishing a business or coming up with a business in Uganda, or formation of a business in Uganda, where you can now even have a single one-person business, you know, registered. Initially, that was a bit of restriction because of the regulations, but now it's actually possible. But they've even lessened the requirements for small-scale actors, so that they can encourage everyone to join the economy, and then to be an actor in the economy, and then be able to drive revenue generation in that economy.
Okay, but do you think it tackled issues to do with the inflation itself, the exchange rates?
Well, those issues are still challenging at the moment. Inflation, as you can see, is still growing, and there were measures taken by the budget, yes, but we are yet to see how these measures will be put to good use to be able to reduce the inflation and to come down.
Oh, you talked about those other projects that the government has put in place, the initiatives, say the MYOGA and the PDM, for all the communities to embrace. You think they'll tackle issues to do with the food insecurity? Or it will help out in terms of, okay, fine, we want the businesses to thrive themselves. And is that bit of like, I need a lot of investment, I need bigger, I need to plan much better. Those are the excuses that you find in the communities. Indeed,
and the challenge of food insecurity is still a challenge to many parts of the country, because what those in agriculture do is they grow. Previously it was more for subsistence, but now the little they are able to produce, they sell. And when they sell, they leave nothing for themselves at the household level. So it increases the food insecurity. So most of the investment is not really actually intended to really grow food for household consumption. It's intended for growing or for producing for the economy, and we need to pay attention to that, because eventually the inflation will not be able to address it, will not be able to bring it down. It will still continue to increase. But also climate change is still biting. The weather patterns that we enjoyed before are not the same weather patterns we enjoy today. So there is need to invest in more programs that allow consistent production throughout the year. Of course, there have been investment in the irrigation scheme, investment in the different products that we should have in the agriculture and agro-processing, but I think this needs to be invested much more to allow everyone to be able to address issues of food insecurity, but also to grow for subsistence as well as we grow for the economy. Okay.
Well, it was presented past, I should say, as well, at the end of the day. What needs to be done for us to track it down for the implementation, the accountability, the transparency itself? How do you think it can be monitored?
I think citizens need to know that engagement in the whole budget implementation process is your obligation as a citizen of this country, and it's patriotic. I remember last time you talked about patriotism. And for me, patriotism is also engaging in how this budget is going to be implemented. You as an ordinary citizen, how do you engage? You already have leaders at different levels. You have local government leaders, but local government leaders sometimes invite ordinary citizens to be able to share information with them on the budget, but also on allocation, and also on utilization at different levels. Please participate as an ordinary citizen. Participate in those local government and village or parish level initiatives that the local governments are undertaking. But also, be keen, be on the lookout, get to know information, access information on how much has been allocated, how much has been released, and to who has it been released to and for what. Most times releases are made, but because ordinary citizens cannot access that information, or ordinary Ugandans cannot access that information, it becomes difficult for them to monitor. But even if you don't access information on what has been released, go to these service provision centers centers, go to the healthy centers themselves, find out what is happening in the healthy center, see what is actually there. Before you fall sick, you need to really first appreciate. Let us share with your local leaders that I was at Healthy Center X and this is what I found. Maybe some local leaders have not yet appreciated what is happening at those centers. Be able to share with them. The issue of education, there's an issue of ghost payments that are being made to ghosts. It's still being uncovered, but it's ghost teachers, ghost students, ghost things, some ghosting there.
And it has been existing for quite
some time, but I think they are coming up with different technological solutions to be able to curb it. But still, as an ordinary citizen, go to these schools, find out what is happening at that school, you know, where your children goes. Engage with the school, engage with the class, engage with the teachers if they are there. Try to find out what are they learning, and because we'll speak to the issue of quality of education. That's how you participate as an ordinary citizen. But also that's how you get to see the kind of service that is being provided to you or to your children if it's at a school. Already allocations are going to be made, and at local government level, we'll be able to see these allocations through different services, schools, health. If you go there, you'll be able to see whether actually this school has been able to tap into the allocation it was meant to receive in a given period. You will see. You will just see what is happening at the school, you see. And if you're a parent, you'll even really feel it, because if there's a gap at school, the gap will come at home, you know, and you'll be able you'll be asked to chip in and support the school and be able to, in the provision of services if it's a public school. For private, of course, that's a different arrangement for those that have, and that's not what we are looking at in this particular budget. But for instance, when it comes to ordinary Ugandans that are using roads, the whole process of maintenance, construction, but also the management of the road network, the transport system itself, you can actually see that resources have been allocated and utilized, and resources have not been allocated or even utilized. For instance, those that are in Kampala and some other places within the country, you have all this challenge around a lot of potholes on the roads. You will be able to see. So as a citizen, engage with your leaders of that particular area and find out why certain roads are not being worked on. Call out your leaders in certain ways. You know, the challenge we have today, which is also a mindset issue, is that everyone who calls out on a challenge or points out a gap of government, you already know that we have all these exhibitions that are running around on these internet-based platforms like Twitter. And when you call out and point out a gap, to the public, to the government, you're received, the perception is different. It's like you are against the government, you're making the government look bad. But sometimes actually it's not making the government look bad, it's probably pointing out a gap that government should pay attention to. So before the government comes in to say that don't make government look bad, let government first pay attention to that gap.
If it's really the truth,
if it's really and explain whether it is true or not true before you come out to defend that. Don't paint the government the kettle black. When it's actually white. We want to see more white kettles, so let's see the white kettles. So for me, that's how the citizens would engage. But also citizens, you've elected your members of parliament. And these members of parliament engage with you at constituency level. How often do you interact with them at constituency level? Beyond, I'm not talking about the interaction of you going to them and asking them for school fees, asking them to bury your dead, asking them to...
There's a lot of rubbish where in the community where we reside.
And that's the issue. For me, I want to find out how many of you engage with your elected members of parliament, or even local council leaders, elected leaders at that level, and point out a gap to them and ask them to fix something that is not working out and take them to see what is happening in the healthy centers. I think that is the kind of engagement that we are asking for, more than the engagement of you wanting them to come and meet your financial needs. Because many times we engage with our elected leaders when we have someone getting married, someone is graduating, someone has died. You know, we have a financial need at household
That is
level.
when you go knocking at the
That's when you go to them,
chairman's door.
Chairman, I have this coming up. So this time I want you to go chairman, and say, chairman, come and see.
Or maybe they have fears of like, chairman,
but if you haven't feared
the community.
If you haven't feared to approach chairman and give them a budget of your daughter who is graduating, or even ask them to pay school fees for your children, then you won't fear. I'm sure you won't have the same fear when you're saying, Chairman, come and see this health center. The garbage here, it has piled for the last 3 months, it hasn't been collected. We'll get sick. You see, I want that kind of engagement. Citizens have that ability. That is patriotism, by the way. That's the patriotism that we want to see. If we are to have any mindset change, let our mindset change to that. Our engagement with our leaders to see the gaps, but also to guide them on what kind of solutions we should have. By the way, some leaders may not really be quick at finding solutions to some of these social challenges, but when they engage with the community, they find that the communities have solutions. So many communities have their own solutions.
So it's good for them to give an ear to what the citizen is complaining about, instead of like, you're painting us black.
Exactly. But then ask them, we knew or we were told we received this money through PDM, when is it coming? Task them to go and also follow up for you, but also monitor. Task them that how come schools in our local government or in our community, in our parish, in our village, have not received their capitation grant. Task them that you're our leaders, you're our representatives. Tell us why not. You see, when you task them, then you're engaging with your leaders. Then it makes it really clear for you to really follow the utilization of the money that has been allocated in this budget, because you cannot really follow or monitor the utilization of the money that has been allocated in this budget without really engaging with those that you have at your forefront, without engaging those that are representing you. So it's very key. Then also following up government programs. Really engage. They are out there. They're in different parts of the country.
And they're not for the rest.
Districts.
And then not taking those opportunities.
And they're not taking these opportunities.
You're not even taking them for granted, and you're like, I need a Casimo Cafe.
No, it's not.
We voted.
Well, that, there's a political connotation to that, but it's not a thank you. When PDM money is allocated to your community, it's not a thank you. It's money that is intended for you to actually participate in the economy. See it from that angle. And that's why mindset change is important. Because if my mindset is that Mzee has thanked us, all our area MPs thanking us, that's why they are bringing PDM. In fact, you find many politicians tagging onto government programs and go and running with them and using them to canvass and mobilize communities.
Good thing at least there was an injection or consideration when it came to the mindset change.
Yes.
So at least there is money allocated
There
to
is
it.
money allocated, but what we are saying is that that money may not be sufficient to really bring our mindset to the level where we want citizens to participate and actually get involved in budget implementation and utilization.
Wow, amazing. Amazing. Time is against us. Wow. I'm being chased out of studio. Sophie is really amazing. Great communication, great clarification, putting a lot of insight in what the budget was all about, the 2023-2024 budget that was presented last week. Sophie Kyagulanyi, policy analyst, thank you so much for your time.
The pleasure is mine.
I'm sure you've been a great inspiration to not only the women watching, but I know to all the citizens who have been following. Wish you all the best.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much, our viewers today. I wish you the best. I encourage you, please go. Tap into all these opportunities, they are yours. Follow up the implementation of this budget and highlight where there are gaps, but also don't forget to highlight where there are achievements, because we really need to thumb up our actors and our allocators of this money and utilizers. Where there is money put to good use, please point that out, but also where you don't see it, point that out. And then we can have a balanced governance. Thank you so much.
Wow. Yes, I am speechless because she has given you a summary, great summary. Enjoy your Monday, enjoy this lovely week. Keep watching the National Broadcaster. My name is Sandra Kahunde, and today I was joined by Sophie Kyagulanyi, policy analyst. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you.